Welcome to another insightful episode on Future Cities Africa. In this episode, we'll explore our Future Cities' framework for great places, shaping vibrant, equitable African cities through place-led development. We'll cover its core components, real-world applications, community co-creation, policy influence, global insights, and a bold vision for Africa's urban future. Today I'm joined by Rashiq Fataar, CEO of Our Future Cities. Rashiq, welcome. Can you walk us through the core components of Our Future Cities' framework for great places and how it prioritizes place-led development to create vibrant, equitable African cities?
Thanks. Well, firstly, over about 15 years of our work, we've been through so many, I would say, studies of spaces, of neighborhoods, of areas with our clients and with partners. And I think using different approaches from different countries or using different frameworks, dare I say that, we always felt that something was missing. So the Our Future Cities framework for great places is really about realizing that it's actually a mix and an orchestration of different things that come together to make these special developments, high streets, squares. And in many of these cases, as we were analyzing and making notes, really again over the last 15 years, often we found that one of them or one of these aspects, which I'll go through, wasn't enough to bring that special quality, to create places with heart where people not only want to photograph, but want to be and spend time and not have to only spend time. And what we found was that it was the combination or orchestration of these four. And the first is place of mind and heart. So this is quite important in the sense that place of mind is functional in a sense. It's places you have to go through a transport interchange. You have to go to a city center for work or a particular office park. Not that it's special, not special, but there's a function. There's a post office, there are services or amenities. Whereas place of heart is that question which everyone asks is why would a family drive 40 minutes to go to Greenpoint Park? Because there's something special, there's an emotional connection. There's 100,000 people when the mayor lights up the festive lights. There's something about memory and history and the emotional connection that it's just nice to be there. You don't have to be there. It's not always necessarily the easiest to get there, but place of heart, there's something that connects you to it that's beyond just forcing you to be there. So that's really the one. The second is design and function. And this is really everything that all of us know: shelter, Wi-Fi, seats. And so we don't get too stuck into this as being the most important, because they've been really well designed street spaces, pedestrian malls, they can also be extremely quiet. So if you look at St. George's Mall in Cape Town, it's pretty busy in the day, but in the evening, it's not. And that's not because it's lack of design or it's well designed. There are benches, trees, there are kiosks in the day, it's in the inner city. So design and function is important as the second one. Then the third area is you've got to have some group of people or an entity or energy that manages or stewards or guides the area. And I think this is sometimes a bit controversial in the sense that it doesn't always have to be an improvement district type model. Sometimes it's the friends of the park. And we've seen how sometimes a suburban park, because there's a group of neighbors that come together and they lock the gate or they have events or they organize music, there is an ownership. So I think in some cases, it's great if things happen organically, but sometimes a bit of maintenance, a bit of securing, especially in our global south context, a bit of organizing and programming is really, really important. You can have the best precinct, but you've got to bring it to life with occasional programming and bringing people into the space. And that requires a bit of work and a bit more work than people think it takes to, so the bit of what we call stewardship, operation, and energy. And the last of those four in terms of this orchestration is people. People and exclamation marks. Often we say people, people, people. Residents, businesses, buskers, shoppers. I don't think there's anybody who thinks of great places and doesn't see people in the picture. Not necessarily always noisy places or thousands of people. It's not always people going to a football match, 60,000 people, but there's people. Uh, there are humans. There's life. There's possibly delivery. There's tourists. There's possibly musicians. And so, if we think of these four circles coming together, that's what we think you need to be reasonably strong in to create these great places. And from our work and from spaces we visited, when one of them is seriously lacking, I think we often try to go towards design and placemaking as the only answer. So I often say that, for example, if people don't have to be there, if there's no place of mind, I don't think the brightest, most colorful tables at night time for people who've now maybe left to go home or is the solution. People might be the solution where you need a restaurant open after 5 p.m. or a cafe open after 5 p.m. And sometimes our sort of urbanist minds get very stuck into it's always design and placemaking, and that will solve everything. But most importantly, of these four areas, underpinning it is society. And that's asking, where is society at? What is the culture? What is the governance? Who are the people? Which country are you in? Which context are you in? And I always have a chuckle at this example from another South African city where we had made the assumption many years ago that people were comfortable to park 4 or 5 blocks away on a high street and walk to the cafe. And so each place, whether we work in South Africa or outside Africa, comes with their own underpinning of society. And we're not saying that you shouldn't tackle that or you shouldn't try and change that. But I think when creating great places, be very clear if you're trying to change the culture of society and how that works, which is a big project, or trying to create a great place where you can actually intervene in those four areas and see what works. And I think of Johannesburg a lot, where, and particularly in some parts of the inner city of Johannesburg, where, if we're frank, it's the governance structures of entities which are not functioning, and not necessarily if our future cities comes along and paints colorful pedestrian crossings, that's going to start the regeneration of some of those areas of the inner city. And if we just come there with solutions around seating and this and this and this, those are great and those can be part of it. But if you're underpinning of the culture, the governance, the way people work together, companies, if there's no trust between companies and the student housing operator, then that regeneration won't work because your foundation needs to be stronger. So in a very long story, that's what the Great Places framework is. And really initially started on a sort of very public space lens, our public realm focus. And over the last few years have become precinct focused and neighborhood focused. In some neighborhoods, we realize, okay, well, there's a societal issue. Maybe it's around safety, maybe it's around culture. And maybe it's you have to wait, or maybe you have to understand that that can't be addressed in addition to some of the other aspects.
Can you share a specific project where your framework has been applied and what key lessons were learned about community driven urban solutions?
Yeah, the application, as I mentioned, was initially focused very much on the public realm and public space, and it's grown a bit to focus on on neighborhoods, on long-term plans, on even future areas of development. The one that I would say we were able to recently apply to is Regent Road in Sea Point. And I find it to be interesting in the sense of, what if an area has gone through the regeneration uh, upswing, in the sense that broadly property values have gone up, the streets are vibrant, tenants want to be there, their buses, my city buses, minibus taxis. And so when we applied our Future Cities Great Places framework to Regent Road, we found that reasonably good in design and function. You can cross the road, the crossings work, you can walk the entire length. Lots of people, not as many as night, but pretty busy during the day. Sometimes the sidewalks and pavements are even too small for the volumes of people that are actually there. Very strong, I would say, energy from the CID, from the city, from the 17 developers that are developing Regent Road at the same time, and good place of mind. So, grocery stores, things that people have to go to, their jobs, the restaurants in which people own or work. But we found that maybe place of heart wasn't that strong. So despite great efforts, and this would work for a group of property owners and developers and passionate people of Sea Point, that the Regent Road place of heart needed to be elevated a bit. So it wasn't about necessarily like other projects, let's say the Bellville CBD, where there's maybe a big, clear challenge or problem. This area had become, I think, according to Time Out magazine, one of the best neighborhoods in the world. But in that case, we felt that when people arrive to Regent Road, we think that they should feel that they're in a place with a particular experience, whether that's adding flags to the street poles, whether that's a particular brand. But when speaking to people, even people living in Seapoint, they hadn't attached Regent Road itself as a particular experience. And the experience for walkers was sometimes a very tricky experience, as if they were sort of sidetracked for all the other activities on Regent Road. But it was very enlightening for us in that, yeah, we're used to spaces maybe not performing well in many areas, and then it's kind of clear. But Regent Road was a bit different, where a lot of it was already in place. Even if you think of the underpinning of society, a reasonable amount of safety in the context of Cape Town and South Africa, and strong civic groups and communities that are operating there. So that underpinning of society was quite good as well.
Rashiq, African cities face rapid urbanization and informality. How does your framework address these challenges, and what role does co creation with communities play in ensuring resilience?
Informality is sort of a strength in the framework. And if we start from the underpinning of society, we start where society is at that moment. So we're not imagining a different society. So if there is informality, informal settlements, or informal conditions, that's where we start from. And that's how we can build that as a strength into the model. And it's very interesting because I think there's such negative perceptions of informality. If I think of one way, in the people aspect of our framework, informality often, if you visit any spaces that have informal conditions, is quite busy. But there's no lack of vibrancy, no lack of energy. If you think the contribution of our informal traders to our economy and to our streets, I'd much rather walk down St. George's Mall when the informal traders are operating and there are 45 of them. We might not agree on the mix of what they sell or if their structures are given the proper dignity, but I think in the global South and African context, informality in our framework is actually a strength in terms of everything. And I think when we look at the design and function elements of our framework, we're not using that to amplify the benefits of various types of informality. If I think back to a very powerful project, which was not a placemaking project, but became one, we documented a drug harm reduction center in Durban in 2022. And it's a community hall with an adjacent green field. And in this room, this program provides methadone, which is just a tiny glass daily to those who are struggling with heroin addiction, completely, out of our field. But that table in that room, around it, there was spaces for people to do laundry outside. There was a hall for classes. There were people during Ramadan praying on the grass outside. And we just realized that sometimes it's not about just design and function. It's about offering a place for people to be. And in this sort of informal condition, which was using, I think, an unused civic hall, we found some of the best kinds of placemaking by people who didn't realize that they were doing it. And in other cases, if you, I think of a Kwamashu, a BMX track in the Kwamashu neighborhood, was part of a project by a few cities where they were creating a program to train people to activate parks. So we visited the park in Hillbrow and Kwamashu and various places, and they trained people to bring this, what we call energy and operation and ownership to the space, because physically the space was there. Surely there was enough people. There was some place of art, but with these, what they called, I think, park activation coordinators, it just was someone trained to organize events, gather the children, make sure that things were, that maintenance issues were raised. And it was a very successful program. And so I think, I think for us in the framework, informality is not seen as some separate condition or a negative, but it's actually where possibly the greatest power of the framework like this can be felt. Yeah.
Your team has engaged with national policies like commenting on South Africa's infrastructure plans. How does our future cities advocate for place-led development at the policy level to shape urban futures?
I think in the earlier years, when we were still Future Cape Town and only worked in Cape Town, our there was a lot of sort of advocacy statements and commenting on every framework and policy. I think the last 10 years have been more about demonstrating. And if I think of the Sea Point pedestrian crossing artwork, which was one of the first in the country where you could introduce art around a pedestrian crossing to improve safety and get motorists to sort of stop before the white line and to bring a bit of life and an awareness to pedestrian safety in the country. At that level, that was a discussion with the city, with the roads and traffic team, and in those cases, the implementation of that was actually 4 working days, but there was a 6 or 7 month period before that to make sure that it aligned with the roads and the traffic and the public art and all of those policy layers. And so in some sense, sometimes advocacy is very unglamorous and it involves a lot of discussion and paperwork. I think in other ways, South Africa is missing place-led thinking at a national policy level. And I think this stems way back to when the sort of Ministry of Housing became the Ministry of Human Settlements. There has been some acknowledgement over time that people need quality places as well in and around where they live and work. but we haven't yet seen that step up yet. So I think there's lots more work to be done to elevate place into policy at a national level, so that if you're at a Belleville taxi interchange, the Golden Arrow, with the minibus taxis, there's a commitment that that experience is extremely positive for everyone in terms of lighting, Wi-Fi, and not always a let's just get the bare bones right, but let's actually make this a space that people have positive experiences in, even while waiting for transport. And it doesn't have to be unmanaged, a lack of lighting, and a bit more dignified. And so I think there's still a lot more work to be on that level to show that it's not purely engineering and architecture, but place quality and can make a big difference to people's lives.
Having studied urban models in places like New York and Toronto, how have global perspectives informed your framework and what makes it uniquely suited for African contexts?
I think every new place we work in or visit has in some way, I think, impacted the framework. And the reason we call it a framework is because it's not a document which landed and pretends to be a recipe for every place in terms of success of great places. It's been built, and we've realized sometimes, oh, we've missed something. Let's say we go to a city like Torino in Italy, which had this incredible regeneration from sort of a unknown Italian city, hosted the Winter Olympics, and then really invested a lot in its public spaces. So in that case, we saw how you didn't need to be in New York or a really large city. If you focused on the people, in that case, they had a large student population. They amplified the squares, the piazzas they had already. They built excitement about the city through the Olympics and through some of their new investments. That place of heart, they're an incredible food region as well. So when we look at these different cities, it's not necessarily always the big ones. What I will say about places like New York is I think we get to see the kinds of residential density we need and employment density and commercial density to get that incredible street. And I think we're missing that in the global south. We really need, I'm not talking about building heights necessarily, but there's almost a Parisian level of density where every block almost has to be at minimum 6 to 8 stories. And even then, possibly a bit more to get enough people living, working, to get that sort of energy on the streets. And then in some other cases, we worked in a very small European country looking at the national mobility strategy and really didn't think that the framework would be involved. But in their shift from a very car-centric driving culture, which we can relate to for various reasons, we just reminded them that as they invest, and in their case, funding wasn't an issue, being part of the EU, but also invest in the quality of your new integrated mobility hubs as mixed use quality places so that people actually want to switch from only using their car, or that students or young people actually see benefit in going to a place of beauty that is functional, much like some of the main hubs in the Netherlands and in Rotterdam and in Utrecht, where they've really invested in those as being great places and interconnectors. And so, yeah, in each way, in the places in which we work and visit, provide these cues. And I would say that in 5 years' time, the framework will be even further enhanced with the views of more people. We had an intern a year ago who just, pointed out, okay, well, here's the gap in the design and function area. We really should think about some of the lack of signage or wayfinding, which sometimes makes it difficult for people who don't know South African cities to maybe walk around, which maybe I don't think we always need everywhere. But really, if you're new to a place, or if you're new to a place in your own city that you haven't been to, if you're looking for a job in a new area, or if you are visiting a friend, then I think those things do matter. So, yeah, in my view, the local and international cases will continue to build it and will continue to apply to this framework.
Rashik, in closing and looking ahead, how do you envision African cities evolving through place led development? And what bold steps should stakeholders take right now to realize this vision?
I think the bold steps that stakeholders need to take in terms of creating great places across Africa is, I would say, two difficult things. The first is we have to make the work of great places become the work of everyone. And we produced this short webinar publication, I think, a few years ago, called the New Placemaking Agenda for Africa, where we realized that a lot of the people who were involved in creating great places weren't architects, planners, urban designers. They were people working at the Drug Harm Reduction Center, people managing transport interchanges, making spaces outside clinics where people wait and hospitals more pleasant with seating and gardens. So it wasn't purely the sort of us as the urbanists come in. And I think if we make great places the sort of the role and the work of more people outside of the built environment, that's really important, because I think there are lots of people who are making better dignified spaces for people who are not getting credit for doing that because they are not, producing PDF documents and master plans and envision. That's the first thing, is we can't rely on only these professions to get us there. And the second thing is we're big fans of unusual collaborations. We think that it's okay if a big developer partners with students on a certain aspect, or a health department is possibly going to work with an urban designer. So I think when we start to see those unusual collaborations, I think that's when we know you're sort of on the right track. But I wouldn't suggest that African cities should look a certain way, or there should be drones flying everywhere. I think it's how we relate to each other and how we give people true power to adapt space, to change space. I think often we think we have that, but if you try and add a structure, or do something new in a public space, in a moment's time, there'll be some authority there saying, well, you shouldn't have done that, you can't do that. But I think, yeah, definitely those two things, is to make the work of great places everyone's work, because a lot of people are already doing it. And then very unusual collaborations usually mean more progress in our work, usually. Yeah.
A big thank you to Rashiq Fataar and Our Future Cities for this insightful conversation on Future Cities Africa.